There you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast. My name is Eitan Mosier. You can find me at Eitan Alive. I'm usually flanked by Sam Stompy Lane. He's not going to be able to join us for today's episode, but that's no worry because we've got one of the best in the business here with us today, fresh off of burning Roto World's pages with fire takes that actually make sense. Mr. John Daigle, what's going on?
How's it going, Eitan? Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks so much for coming on, man. I've just been kind of consuming all the NFL stuff that I could lately. We were just talking about the draft before we started the show. I mean, I feel like everybody's getting a little bit stir crazy. So now the one thing that we can actually kind of rely on happened, and now we're waiting for some period of uncertainty about the season. But you mentioned you had some optimism about us potentially having a 2020 season for the books. Care to elaborate on that?
Everything's looking a little more positive, I would say. Again, like everyone else, I know nothing officially. I just think we're going to have a season, but it's going to be a different one than normal. We should not expect the same type of performance and efficiency from some offenses. I really think continuity will be the most important key whenever this thing kicks in. But I mean, there are going to be opportunities either way. I like one thing right off the start. I really think we should be looking at betting a ton of unders at first, because just rookies coming in who won't even be receiving a pass from their own quarterback until September, let alone offenses not playing together until that time. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be as efficient performance as we tend to see when the regular season kicks in, which means it's going to start a little slower, which means it may be a little more boring, but we're going to appreciate it nonetheless because it's still football, and we just have to decide what to do and how to be actionable if that is the case across the board.
Yeah, these are kind of uncharted waters that we're in right now, so it's kind of up to us to just keep it moving as much as we possibly can. And we're going to get to the football stuff in just a moment, but as you know, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there listening to the show, we do generally like to start with something a little bit different on each episode before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show. So your bio mentioned Roto World. It also mentioned some time as a wrestler. You got to tell me that story.
My bio is awful, by the way. I just really don't know ever how to approach the bio. It's like someone handling compliments, or myself handling compliments, I should say. I just don't know how to do it right. So it's like, I know you need to have your job up there, but also like you want to make people laugh or something, or tell them a little more about yourself. And so it's just, hey, I work at Roto World, NBC Sports, yes, but also it says professional wrestler, but really I'm just an old 32-year-old wrestling fan. I'm proud to admit it. I still absolutely love the sport, whether it's AEW or WWE. As someone who has no partner, has no kids, has kind of just leveraged my flexibility in life to just go other locations, which means like my passive income, it's only spent on travel and wrestling, because I really don't have many physical items as well. So I even travel for it. I like going to different cities and going to big events for big quote unquote fights. So yeah, I love wrestling, sad to say.
You got to tell me, man, what is the dopest place you've been? What's the one that you remember the most?
For wrestling or for traveling?
Either of them. I assume kind of they're interconnected.
Well, I mean, yeah, so we were talking behind the scenes chat about these next upcoming months. And right now, you know, everyone's doing all the research and getting ahead of time, but we're approaching those 1 to 2 month span that usually, you know, we get our travel in. And that's kind of where I separate, and I'll go off into the mountains. I like to travel internationally and hike. So like the South Island, New Zealand, I would tell everyone to go to. I take an annual hike to Banff, Alberta, Canada, the most beautiful place still to this day I've ever seen in the world. I haven't been to the Swiss Alps yet. I haven't been to the coast of Italy yet, and a few other hiking spots in general, like Ethiopia, I want to go to as well. But I would say Banff, Alberta is one of the most amazing, stunningly beautiful places that should be on just Microsoft screensavers everywhere. So I take a cabin trip out there once a year. Also, let's see. Iceland is beautiful, and it's so close. It's only 5 hours away from Boston. Of course, you can't do these things right now because all borders are shut off. But if you want to keep in mind these things as they come up next year, I would suggest those three locations in particular to everyone. For wrestling, though, honestly, it's really simple, but I think New York is a really good crowd. It's a little more costly because the big events like SummerSlam are typically held there, or your big like Madison Square Garden's WrestleManias. But the New York crowd in general is typically really good because people don't realize that when a city hosts a wrestling event, it becomes a wrestling city. So like everywhere you go, if that's something you're into, even say if it's something like Marvel movies you enjoy or whatever else normal people enjoy, I don't know, video games, I guess. If you go to a city, now imagine everyone in that city just wants to wear the clothing and talk about the same thing, no matter what bar you go to. So yeah, I'll just travel to a place. I'll go out for drinks, meet strangers, and just kind of wander over to the arena with them and then scream and chant and then call it a night, go to the hotel and pack up and come back home the next day. So the best place I would say I've been is New York for an event like that. But any big metropolitan, even LA, something like that is really fun.
Man, you're saying so many things that have me sitting here a little bit jealous. I've never been out of the U.S. In fact,
there's always time. There's no hurry. There's always time, man.
Oh yeah, there will be. The time will come. But the biggest thing that I remember was I was in New Orleans actually during Mardi Gras before Katrina, the year before Katrina. So that was absolutely insane, and that's probably my fondest moment travel-wise, other than cruises.
Did you go off Bourbon Street? Like, did you actually see the other parts of the culture?
Oh yeah, yeah. We saw.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we saw like they had like some old style Victorian houses. That you saw a bunch of the cemeteries, and they had like these huge, like I guess mausoleum types of things that were built on the ground because I guess you can't bury people in that type of soil. I guess they come up because it rains so often in that area. So that was interesting to learn about. But yeah, we took like some city tours and whatnot, and kind of went off the beaten path when we could.
That's the thing. Like, you have to see Bourbon Street. Everyone that goes needs to go there for one night because you have to experience it. But you appreciate New Orleans whenever you start seeing everything else surrounding there. Even the side streets, like 5 blocks over from Bourbon Street. You, of course, have to be safe because you may wander out too far. But there are some streets that you'll just mosey on by, and it's just a lawn, and there's just jazz and a few chairs sitting around, and you can just order like alligator and shrimp. It's some of the best food you'll have anywhere in the world, not just America, anywhere in the world in New Orleans. And just to experience that kind of culture, that's the place that the proudness, the pride even seeps into your veins, kind of like a Memphis. When you go there, it's so small, but like you can feel it oozing from everyone that they just take such pride in everything they do there. And New Orleans is just like that. It's an amazing place. I'm glad you got to see it.
Oh yeah. That was definitely one of the highlights. But now let's get into what we came here to talk about. I was just reading some of your Road World work lately. It looks like a lot of it was based on best ball, and I wanted to ask you, I mean, is that your favorite method of fantasy, or is that just kind of the one you're focused on now? What do you most enjoy playing when you're looking for a fantasy format?
It varies really, but right now, best ball and dynasty startups are where it's at. That's just kind of what the territory is during these off-season months. However, I will say I enjoy probably more than anything, even more than like the season-long grind that kind of wears you down. Season-long fantasy football, like that's the most important. That's our bread and butter. We know that. But also that's literally like, imagine sitting at a cash game poker table for a 48-hour plus run. Like that's what it is. You're just sitting there tired, grinding. You're trying to make the correct mental decision. No matter what, you get up for a cup of coffee, you sit back down, you do the work again. And that's what it feels like, only for a X amount of a payout at the end. Whereas best ball, it's amazing because you don't set your lineup at all. You draft. And there's so much strategy that goes into drafting. If you know the steps, if you know what to do, like I truly believe anyone can come out 55%, just like ROI, ahead of their money, and make good at the end of the year just by making the correct pre-draft and post-draft decisions. And that pre-draft block is what I love the most. because that's when there are still the most edges among any format to get. You're still baking in news to get ahead of the curve. Even something, take for instance, it's simple as drafting Giovanni Bernard in the last round right now, because he is still a last round option. Joe Mixon could potentially hold out. He's already said as much. Christian McCaffrey just got $16 million annually. The Bengals aren't going to give Joe Mixon that, right? I'm not saying they won't reach something lesser of an extension with him, but the fact is they're not going to probably give him the money he wants. And he said he's going to hold out if they don't give him the money. So if that's the case, we should be just adding Giovanni Bernard in the last round every single draft, because that's suddenly an RB1 if Joe Mixon does hold out. And it's just like a bunch of decisions like that I love adding into the mix that no one else sees, because that's what really helps you win in best ball leagues.
Oh yeah, it's all about planning ahead and thinking about those what if opportunities and finding ways to capitalize on value that other people don't see. But in the Joe Mixon case specifically, I heard some information that the new collective bargaining agreement actually really disincentivizes players to hold out, because they don't accrue that fourth year of playing time without playing the full season, in a way that even Melvin Gordon didn't necessarily have to deal with last season. Is there some evidence to the contrary of that?
No, that is true. And fines are heftier as well. So everything would lead you to believe that it probably won't happen, right? But at the same time, we're not worried about adding, just like DFS payouts, you have to also think about what you can potentially win with the cost of the decision. And like to add Giovanni Bernard, and this is just one case, right? There are so many cases I could talk about. We may get to them later. But to add Giovanni Bernard as your RB8, right? When he could literally win your week one of those weeks, since you can't set your lineup for 13, 14 weeks, that matters. So I'm more than willing to take that chance. It's just like last year how everyone said like, oh, like you shouldn't be drafting because Tyreek Hill is potentially facing a suspension and we don't know what will happen. Tyreek Hill didn't get suspended at the end of the day, but that's when you should be drafting, because people then were betting on that risk. They were taking him early with the risk that he would not get suspended, and thus it paid off for them. So yes, you just have to remember, much like the stocks, much like life in general, there is always information to be had, and it's up to you to decide what to do with that information. It might not be what you want to hear sometimes, but there's always like an actionable way to approach everything we have.
I love talking to you because you kind of set me up for these perfect segues. We're going to go into...
I don't mean to. I'm a mess.
Hey, they're just perfect, man. They're just we have that chemistry already. So we talked about being able to, again, kind of find situations and draft in the uncertainties. And this was going to lead me directly into figuring out kind of what is your strategy overarchingly. A lot of people try not to miss in the first few rounds. That's their most important thing. That's what they base everything on. It's not missing in the high value rounds. Is that what you're trying to do? Or are you just going for upside in lieu of everything, regardless of what you might have to deal with later?
It depends on what you're doing. For like the higher stakes leagues, like your Football Guys championships, which are like $350 an entry, or your main events, which is like $1,800 an entry, I would suggest people don't even pay attention to those. Those happen like in August, so you don't have to worry too much about those. Because by then, like all the sharps are in those rooms and we're all trying to gain an edge against one another. And so we're just going off the board, trying different things to get an edge, knowing what the other person's going to do. It's like playing incorrectly because you know what's going to happen. So you're just trying to heighten the probability using different methods. It's really strange. It's a strategy within a strategy. It's game theory. But I'm assuming everyone that's listening is probably just wanting to jump in and dabble with recreational best ball, which is fine. It's so much fun. And plus, I would argue people drafting in like $1, $3, $5 leagues, whatever the case, are still much more educated and ready to draft when August comes along than all your other teammates, because you've been in touch and in tune with ADP to that point. So you understand where players are going. So suddenly, if you see in your friends league, like this guy falls a couple rounds, you're thinking with all the other strangers you drafted with online, oh, well, that doesn't make much sense. Like, I don't like this player. Like, I don't hate anybody, honestly. This is something the Podfather, Matt Kelly, always says, and it's so true. He doesn't hate players. He hates ADP. And that's how I think. I don't like or hate players. I like and hate ADP. So if someone falls that I dislike, it's like, well, if that ADP is good, of course I'm going to take like Marlon Mack 4 rounds later than he should be going, and whatever the case. So just doing that, I think basic strategy in your 10 to 12 man leagues, which are these normal recreational best ball leagues. Simply put, look at quarterback and tight end best weeks. That's the first steps you got to do, because remember, since you can't set your starting lineup, you need to have points ready to go for those positions whenever those players are on bye, because you can only start one. So quarterback, make sure you don't stack bye weeks. You want to draft 2 or 3. Tight ends, the same thing. You want to draft 2 or 3. And then you can go 7 or 8 wide receivers and running backs. If you draft tight end early, which is something I love to do, especially in the back end, because it allows for a lazy strategy. You can pretty much just drink and then coast all the way to the end, because you don't have to worry about tight end, because the odds of let's say a Jay Sternberger, even him outscoring Travis Kelce in any week is 10% probably. So you don't really have to worry about a backup tight end at all. Your only job is to grab a high upside touchdown guy like a Cam Brate, like an OJ Howard, even like a Mo Alley Cox or Eric Ebron, because those are only touchdown guys, and you just want the off chance they outscore the number 1 tight end every week. So I like that strategy. And then quarterbacks, it really just comes down to how strong you are and what rounds you wait for. RotoViz did an amazing study. Sean Siegel, Spider 2Y Banana. No, it's at FF_Contrarian, I believe, on Twitter. I think he changed his handle. One of the smartest guys in the industry. He does an annual best ball series. And he discovered something last year that has stayed true to this year, and that win rates are higher, so you'll win more leagues overall if you draft your quarterbacks in rounds 7 through 12. 2 quarterbacks, 3 quarterbacks, doesn't matter the approach you use. Just don't stack your bye weeks and draft them in round 7 through 12. So those like 4 or 5 steps I just gave, if you literally just start there, I think most people will just come out ahead in your normal 10 to 12 man leagues.
So for somebody like you that's playing a lot of best ball leagues, are you really concerned about managing your exposure to certain players? Are you trying to make sure you diversify the major assets that you're investing on your best ball teams?
For me, I actually hate it, because I end up taking players I don't even like to some extent, because just like stocks, like you treat it like a portfolio if you play a lot, and you don't want to overexpose yourself. Like it's just like business. The one rule of business is to never get to a point where you can crash. You never want to be able to sink the ship. And so just like best ball, if I draft in so many leagues and have one player, like say Josh Allen this year, I love him. I think I even have him like at 67% right now, which is not a good thing, by the way. Do not compliment that. He should be closer to 33%. And even that is probably giving a little too much, but I do love him this year.
I think he's very undervalued right now.
He's like, you can still get him as a QB 7 or 8 in round 7 or 8. And to me, that's a steal. A guy who has overall QB1 potential. But the fact of the matter is, you should stick around if you're drafting it a lot, around 30% probably max. Having said that, pre-draft exposure, what I typically do is I like to go overboard with the guys I love, guys like Calvin Ridley, Alan Lazard, Paris Campbell, guys like that, and bet on their chances pre-draft. And then I'll go back post-draft, since there's a lot more months post-draft, and I'm evening it all out and tip the scales back.
I love it. So let's go from best ball drafting to the actual NFL draft, and let's talk about some of the, I guess, most surprising picks the teams made that it kind of had you lowering your jaw, opening your mouth a little bit, and kind of sitting there a little bit confused. What was the silliest pick you saw in the first 2 days of the NFL draft?
For fantasy purposes?
For fantasy purposes or for real football purposes, if you want to talk about the Aaron Rodgers situation.
I mean, the Packers and the Falcons just got Fs from everyone universally, because it just wasn't how you build teams. And I know what the Colts said. The Packers. The Packers said the Colts were going to jump the Ravens and Titans, and thus they had to be the ones to jump. But if the Colts were jumping up for Jordan Love, which is not true by all accounts, that you just let them have Jordan Love. Like, it's clearly not a necessity, especially given the outlook of your offense. So you just let them do the jump and you just let them take them. But no, instead they went the complete opposite direction. They grabbed a successor who, gets 4 years in a rookie window. That's how teams win. You build on the rookie contract, since quarterbacks cost the most of your cap when it's time to re-up them. But now, what is it going to be? 50% of this deal that the Packers can't even address accordingly. They can only have 2 years of the Jordan Love's rookie window, I guess. And that's even if Aaron Rodgers, they void his contract, because they do have a team-friendly out in 2022, but that's still in 2022. So just bad GMing, just terrible job. I feel bad for Packers fans because it was so easy to just make Rodgers' life easier for however much longer you have his window to win. And they're already a team that we believe will regress, overachieve with 13 wins. It's insane that Kyle Shanahan kind of beat his offense into their heads, and that's how they wanted to build with A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. But it's just a mess there. But for fantasy purposes, I'll say 2 wild picks. Let's go with the same team, because the Rams just last year traded up number 94, number 99, 24 spots to get Darrell Henderson, number 70. So we thought they were in love with him. But then with a higher investment this year, they took Cam Akers with the number 52 overall pick. Cam Akers is a terrific player, don't get me wrong, but we never even thought he'd enter the top 4 of dynasty running backs, right? Because he wasn't supposed to land with this much draft capital. And suddenly he is one of the few backs that could potentially reach 250 plus touches in his first year, because Darrell Henderson even got out-touched. And I love Darrell Henderson, love him. But the fact is, he got out-touched by Malcolm Brown last year. Like, Malcolm Brown nearly doubled the touches, wasn't nearly as explosive. Darrell Henderson still broke just under 25% of the tackles he faced on around 42 touches. But the fact is, Malcolm Brown out-touched him. So we don't know what this offense is, but we know they love Cam Akers, and they have more invested in Cam Akers. So he suddenly becomes the number 4 running back in Dynasty, or at least for this year, because he can have 200 plus touches. And then with same team, the next pick, 5 picks later, whereas they should have addressed offensive line, they grabbed 24-year-old Van Jefferson, who is such an NFL guy. Like, he's such a guy, like, of course he runs good routes. I understand that. And supposedly he was the fastest wide receiver at the Senior Bowl. But I think if they just garnered to him because he was a fast guy who showed well at the Senior Bowl. But in college, 5 collegiate seasons, no more than 700 yards in every single year. He's just someone who does not project well at all at the next level. And so the fact that you still had Josh Reynolds, who has performed quite well given the circumstances, as the replacement for Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks when they have been injured the past 2 years, to just bring in another receiver to compete with Josh Reynolds for the number 3 after you traded Brandon Cooks is a really, really odd choice. So I thought that was a very bad pick at that spot.
Yeah, a couple of redundant assets there. You mentioned Darrell Henderson, them making the trade up to get him just or then replace him with Cam Akers. Malcolm Brown is still on the team. Sean McVay has come out and said that all 3 backs, he expects them to get work. Now, that might be coach speak right now, but, I mean, that, to me at least, coupled with the offensive line issues that the Rams are certainly going to have this season, it kind of makes me a little bit weary about Cam Akers moving forward. And then you talked about Van Jefferson. He seems as if he's kind of a direct replacement to Cooper Kupp. Maybe they're just trying to hedge against Cooper Kupp's contract demands in a year because they'll need to make a decision at that point. But, yeah, it just seems like they had these players on their team to kind of fulfill certain roles already, and at some point just decided to start throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks.
It's just a funky offense, because if they are leaning more towards 12 personnel, which I think we should assume following the deal to Brandon Cooks, one, Cooper Kupp couldn't even beat up outside corners in college. So what is he going to do at the NFL level? That's why they took him off the field. His snap rate dipped under 60% last year over the final month of the season, because they did use Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett together more once Tyler Higbee broke out as Gronk for some reason. And so it's a really bad situation for Cooper Kupp, which is why he's one player I'm avoiding avidly in any format this year, best ball included. Having said that, Robert Woods is on the other end of the spectrum because Woods has been successful in both spots, in the slot and the outside. And Robert Woods was outscored 10 touchdowns to 2 by Cooper Kupp last year, despite leading the team in target share and air yards. So Robert Woods, I love, which is completely opposite of my outlook on Kupp this year.
You don't think that departure of Brandon Cooks, even though it's not a huge amount of targets that are going out with him, and he was obviously used in a different way, just means kind of a little bit more of a target share for all parties involved when it comes to the Rams?
No, I do, but if the tea leaves lead to what they're telling us, and who knows at this point, but I think the departure of Brandon Cooks means they do want to run more 2 tight end sets and keep Everett and Higbee on the field more together, which means it would strictly be, for the most part, Woods and Kupp. And like I said, that would mean Kupp is on the outside, and Kupp has not been successful on the outside. So yes, more targets for all, but I think you have to factor in Gerald Everett more so than normal. Like Gerald Everett kind of he was sort of complacent when he came back from injury. He came back and he battled injuries. But remember, he had that 4 or 5 game stint where Higbee couldn't even get on the field, couldn't run a route because Everett
he broke
so
out
good.
before Higbee did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They both broke out last year. In fact, a lot of the the fervor around Tyler Higbee right now amongst many fantasy analysts, many dynasty analysts that I've spoken to is that Higbee might just find himself a top 6 or so tight end in the league if the Rams truly do intend on running 12 as often as we think they. Are you in agreement with that, or do you think that's a little bit of outsized expectations?
I think he's an exceptional talent, but right now I'm leaning towards fading him just because he's in the range of tight ends like the Austin Hooper range where the return is so minimal compared to just waiting like even 10 extra rounds. Oh, not 10. Let's not go that far. Let's say like 7 extra rounds to grab a guy like Blake Jarwin. Since we know from tight end 8 on is an absolute wasteland. It's about who can get touchdowns, and that's all that matters. So although I think he's a really good talent and played very well for those last 5 games last year, he's actually more on my fade list for this upcoming season. Dynasty, though, I will fully admit to you, I just started heavily in Dynasty this year. I started writing the college blurbs, like our player blurbs for every single player in the draft at RotoWorld this year. So that actually got me more involved in a lot heavier research, especially in metrics behind the scenes. So I'm well versed in Dynasty this year. However, long term, how do you feel about Tyler Higbee?
Long term, I feel like Tyler Higbee is somebody that you want on your team. He just signed his contract, I believe, a year ago.
It was a steal,
he was just
too.
recently extended. Absolutely. And Gerald Everett wasn't extended. The Rams have cap hell. They have no first round draft pick, I believe. They didn't have one this year. I don't think they have one next year as well, if I'm correct. I'll need to check on that. So I just think that it's going to be really difficult for this Rams team to restock in the way that they want to. And for that reason, I see him kind of found in a situation where he's going to be needed to be relied upon probably more than they might even want to use him just because of the lack of alternatives that they're going to have over these next couple of seasons as they start to try to build and refill all the holes that they've kind of made in these last couple of years. It looks like they're starting to purge now, and I think that might continue, and we might see some interesting breakups when it comes to Cooper Kupp with his contract, when it comes to Robert Woods with his contract, when those come up in the next couple of seasons.
Interesting. Okay. That may be something I have to look more into. For this year, though, and maybe it's just not more so in Dynasty since I'm not thinking in terms of, 2-3 years down the road. I think just particularly for this season, I'm a little lower than consensus on Tyler Higbee. So I could very well be wrong.
I love that you mentioned Blake Jarwin, though. That's been my tight end of choice that I'm kind of telling everybody to draft late right now. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb didn't necessarily help the people who were in favor of Blake Jarwin, but I'm also of the opinion that a rising tide lifts all boats when it comes to these offenses. And if the offense can continue to be not only as pass happy as the Cowboys were, but as effective as the Cowboys were, then I think that we're just going to find the Cowboys in more red zone situations, and that's going to be benefit everyone, especially the tight end of the offense, who you would expect to catch some of those high-value targets.
Oh, yeah. You want to talk about big post-draft winners. Like, I don't know what Dak can do to fail this season. I really don't. The Cowboys last year were already the 11th highest. They had the 11th highest pass play rate in neutral game script. I'm sure your listeners already know what that is, but quickly, neutral game script, one score situations, and we prefer to look at that because that dictates what offenses want to do, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what they do because they could be behind by 2 scores. Within 1 score, what they do, pass or run, tells us what they actually want to do. So already at the 11th highest rate last year, 60% pass rate. One of the only offenses since the NFL merger, one of only 11 to average 6.5 yards per play, and number 2 in Football Outsiders is offensive DVOA. And this is without CeeDee Lamb now. And now they have 3 stud wide receivers, and it's great. I talked about this on one of the last few Roto World podcasts, and the Cowboys have moved closer to what I think the next wave of imagination is in football, and that is the positionless game. And that is teams cannot prep for whether Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb together will be in the slot or on the outside. They have no idea what's coming up. And Cooper has been a better player in the slot historically. CeeDee Lamb led the nation in yards per route run from the slot in Oklahoma just last year. So both players can have their will. It's going to be tough to pin down who produces weekly because Gallup also is a tremendous player. Anytime someone goes by in their rookie and you don't hear much from them, that's typically a good thing. The fact Gallup has nearly recorded roughly 2,000 receiving yards in the first 2 years in the league, it makes him a tremendous asset. So, yeah, Dak, I unfortunately won't have much of him in best ball because he's still fall as a top 3 or 4 quarterback as he should in those early rounds where I typically don't reach for him. But there's no doubt about it. He's my QB3 on the entire year.
Oh, yeah. You talk about QB1 potential. I think Dak Prescott has it just because of his weapons. That's actually going to lead us directly into our 5-point inspection. Again, with the segues, man, we're just brushing through this. So we were going to talk about the Cowboys initially, but we already started doing that. All the success for the Cowboys means only one thing for me, and this means they're playing a very dangerous game when it comes to franchise tagging Dak Prescott, because Kirk Cousins a couple of years ago had himself some decent seasons in a row and all of a sudden was the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, at least until the next guy signed his contract. I think that was already assumed for Dak Prescott, but with the addition of CeeDee Lamb, with Blake Jarwin instead of Jason Witten from last year, with Mike McCarthy, who we expect, as you said, they were already a pass-first team in neutral situations, we expect that to continue this year, and that can only mean good things for Dak Prescott. So this has become a situation where Dak prices himself out of what the Cowboys can do.
Yeah, some of my own colleagues even have mentioned that Dalton's signing is bigger news than we should expect. Like maybe Dak should be worried, but Dak is just fine. Do not worry about him. Deadlines make deals is the Cowboys' mantra historically. That's the way they've always worked, whether it's holdout situations, whether it's long-term extensions, franchise tags. You go back to Zeke, DeMarcus Lawrence, DeMarcus Ware, DeMarco Murray, the list goes on and on. Deadlines have always made the deals for Jerry Jones. He waits till the very last second, and thus he gets no value. But what does value matter whenever you have all the money in the world? So it's just the way things work. Dak is absolutely going to make $30+ million annually. There's no doubt about it. And he deserves it, honestly. He's never missed a game. He was on pace for 5,000 receiving yards or 5,000 passing yards in his first year under Kellen Moore last year. Before that, AC shoulder joint just ruined him over the last month of the season. And Andy Dalton, for a team that has historically literally not cared about backup quarterback whatsoever. You go back to Drew Bledsoe. Tony Romo, as great as he was an undrafted free agent. The team just didn't care at all. They just picked up a guy and threw him there. Luckily, Bill Parcells was a tremendous GM and scout, so he saw talent. But the fact is they still got Tony Romo for essentially minimum. And then throughout the Tony Romo's years, despite him being injury-riddled, right, and having a shoddy offensive line play ahead of him, they still looked to Vinny Testaverde, Brandon Whedon, Brad Johnson, John Kitna, just guys who shouldn't even been in the league, let alone a second string direct backup. So it's just a position they've never cared about at all. And Andy Dalton only landed there because he lives in Katy, Texas. Shout out to Los Cucos Mexican Restaurant. They have the best tres leches cake there you're ever going to have in your life. But he lives just a few minutes away from the closest organization, can see his family and kids year-round for $3 million a year. And for the Cowboys, although you never prioritize that situation, what do you care for $3 million? Cooper Rush, who wasn't worth $2.1 million, was making that on an exclusive rights tender. So for $900K more, you get to upgrade to literally the best backup in the entire league. So of course you take that deal. If you're hearing that Dalton is a threat to Dak, do not listen at all. If you're hearing Dalton is a threat to Dak's long-term extension, do not listen at all. Dak is the starter, for better or worse, for the next 5+ years, and that's the way it is.
I fully agree with that. I think the Dalton news being blown up to more than it should be is kind of the craziest attempt at some people to maybe just break up the monotony of
it's a slow month
pandemic.
We got to get clicks. I think that's what's happening. Slow month.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the last thing about the Dallas Cowboys that we'll talk about, and then we'll move on to our next team. We just talked about how invested this team is in passing. Even the signing of Andy Dalton just shows that even if Plan A fails, even if things go wrong for this team, Plan B is still to continue to be a pass-first offense, kind of moving away from what they were a couple of years ago with a Zeke-first, run-first offense. Now, Ezekiel Elliott just signed that huge extension. So from a dynasty perspective, there is some solace in understanding that, okay, well, at least this guy is going to be here for the foreseeable future. That Cowboys offensive line, however injury-riddled they've been in the last couple of seasons, at least are a pretty talented offensive line if they can all stay healthy. Is there some worry, though, that Ezekiel Elliott's role might begin to get replaced? Because I was doing some work for Numberfire about a season ago, and I was comparing Ezekiel Elliott to Tony Pollard in terms of what these guys were able to do in the receiving game. Ezekiel Elliott had a whole bunch of volume, if you remember, a couple of seasons ago in the receiving game, but didn't actually do much with it. When I looked at Numberfire's expected, I think it was expected points or expected value. I'm not sure what it was that I was looking at a couple of years ago, but when I was looking at their model, what I found was that Ezekiel Elliott was actually one of the least efficient receivers at the running back position, and that Tony Pollard was significantly better than him in that respect. Now, I don't believe Zeke is going to be coming off the field just because the money kind of dictates that he's going to be on the field for 3 downs in most cases, but are we going to start to see his workload start to get neutered, and is that going to chip away at the value of an Ezekiel Elliott in dynasty leagues moving forward?
Okay, first of all, anything that JJ Zachariason tells you, my boy, make sure you listen, because I can thank a lot of people for where I am today, but I can greatly attribute 3-4 people for helping me out directly, and JJ made me a much better rider historically. Like JJ, I can thank him. I will have to thank him the rest of my life for giving me all the tips in the world. So first of all, listen to everything that man says. Second of all, I don't think so, unfortunately, because like everyone else, I am a Tony Pollard stan. The dude in his first year, first of all, to have 25 all-purpose touchdowns at Memphis as a hybrid running back wide receiver, special teams field flipper is impressive in itself. But then to come out as a rookie and work behind Ezekiel Elliott in a contract year, we knew he was facing a holdout situation, but then to still lead the league, lead his position in yards after contact per attempt, which is a number that has proven sticky to success year to year in the NFL. It's super impressive. So I love Tony Pollard. Maybe he gets a little more work in the passing game, but unfortunately, the contract, the $90 million albatross, the $90 million elephant in the room is what keeps Ezekiel Elliott glued to the field. And I don't think Mike McCarthy is signed unless he understands the give and take with Jerry Jones. And the give is he gets to run the team like he wants to. But the take is the team already paid the guy $90 million, and you're not taking him off the damn field. So unfortunately, that could lead, sure, to more passing opportunity for Tony Pollard, which I would absolutely love. Work him in the slot more, do whatever you can. But I think it ultimately still leads to 25-plus touches for Zeke, and Tony Pollard still blowing up when he gets to spell him and blowout games.
So no fear with Ezekiel Elliott moving forward at all, regardless of what we think the Cowboys are kind of going to do going forward.
Unfortunately, not much fear for me. No.
All right. So now let's move on to another.
Do you have a contrarian opinion on that?
You know what? I don't necessarily know if I have a contrarian opinion. I don't believe, like I said initially, that the contract makes sure that he's going to be on the field. Now, whether or not he's going to be getting the ball all the time, whether or not he's going to be getting 25 touches a game, I'm not sure if I do agree with that. I think he might be on the field in more pass blocking situations than we've seen him recently, just because what we've seen from Mike McCarthy, at least during the years that he was in Green Bay, that he had Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback, they were among the top 5 passing offenses in the league. They were among the top 5 attempts for at least the last couple of years before he was eventually fired. That was definitely a pass-first team. Now, I don't think that it's going to be the same because there was nobody like a Zeke on those teams, and obviously Aaron Rodgers kind of means that you have to kind of use what you can with your team to the best of that ability. So you have to go ahead and make that a pass-heavy team. But I just think that all signs are pointing towards the Cowboys shifting from more of a balanced offense to one that's looking to put pretty much all the pressure on Dak game in, game out. And that coupled with Dak's ability to somehow every year get 6 touchdowns on the ground at the goal line, I think is just going to continue to maybe not eliminate the value of Zeke, but just slightly chip away at it and chip away at it and chip away at it, to the point that I think that if you're drafting him in, I would say, the first 6 to 8 picks of a dynasty startup right now, I think you might be getting a value that I think you might be getting an asset that is past its peak price, that doesn't necessarily have much space to go up from here.
So you think now is the time essentially to sell Zeke because he's peaked out? Like you might get 1 or 2 more good years from him, but he's pretty much peaked out.
If you want max value on Zeke, then absolutely. Now, If you're in a situation where you're a team that is looking to win the championship this year, you're really well built everywhere else, then absolutely Zeke is going to be a piece that gets you there. But if you're a team that maybe is on the cusp of a playoff spot or maybe a year and a half out, I'm not sure if you want to acquire too much Ezekiel Elliott, because I think by the time your team is ready to compete, he might not be in that same situation.
Okay. That's works for me. Yeah, I like the opinion.
All right, so now let's talk about the Steelers. There's a lot of talk about what happened with Juju Smith-Schuster last year. Juju Smith-Schuster, in case people have forgotten, was one of the most productive young rookie receivers we've seen ever. I think he was top 3 in terms of total yards gained before the age of 23 in the NFL. He obviously had to deal with a situation of not really having a quarterback. Last year, Deontay Johnson was introduced into the offense with Washington. This year, there's the added Eric Ebron and Chase Claypool. We expect Ben Roethlisberger to come back. So there's a lot of positive for that offense, but it can also mean a lot of moving parts for the specific players in that offense. Let's start with Juju, and then we can kind of go down the list from here. But, I mean, how excited are you for the Juju Big Ben reunion? Are you of the opinion that Juju's last year had a lot of things to worry about, but it was also the absence of Antonio Brown that prevented him from really taking off? Or do you think that, yes, that was a factor, but that's not the most important thing to be looking at here? And what you should be looking at is the fact that Juju was as productive as he was, as early as he was in the NFL.
It's like you said, the man recorded 2,300 receiving yards in his first 2 years in the league. That's not just something to gloss over. That's literally blue chip elite territory. That's something that doesn't happen by accident, right? So what we have is a 30-game sample. Yes, across from Antonio Brown, but still working more as an alpha, whereas we have a 12-game sample and 62 pass attempts from Ben Roethlisberger buried in that 12-game sample, where he failed to live up to the hype from Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, both which should be third-string quarterbacks at best, I guess. And yet they're still going to compete for Ben Roethlisberger's direct backup job for some reason this year. So I'm buying Juju wherever possible. I'm drafting Juju as an unequivocal wide receiver one. And I just think everyone would be wise to treat his situation the same as it was last year, whatever your opinion was last year. If last year you had reason to believe he couldn't hang as the true alpha without Antonio Brown for a full year, perfectly reasonable, and just go about your approach like that. But if you thought he was going to explode like I did, then go about your research like that, because we essentially learned absolutely nothing last year.
Yeah, there's so many context clues that people sometimes gloss over when it comes to looking at these individual box scores and looking at these players from a year-to-year basis. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not this guy can actually be successful in this given situation. And yeah, what you talked about him not having a quarterback, essentially, I think is a huge thing. That's more important than for me having a guy like Antonio across from him. Not that didn't help, but I do think that he can still succeed as a one.
I totally agree. And I've been buying him as a one. I'm actually kind of upset at myself because in best ball leagues in particular, in the pre-draft rooms, I was taking him as like the wide receiver 11 or 12 because I thought that's where the value was. But everyone was still down on him apparently. And you can still to this day get him as like the wide receiver 14 or 15. And I think it's egregious if he's not a wide receiver one overall. In the fourth, fifth round, you can still have him for. So I think you need to jump in and take advantage of it right now, still to this day.
Oh yeah. That is one of those guys that is going crazily undervalued.
The question for Dynasty though, like 3 years down the road, you're asking yourself, how many more years does Ben Roethlisberger have? And then who is their backup? Because the Steelers have notoriously taken shots on backup quarterbacks at will. They're just up at the pop shot game, just taking them, just trying to get their successor to Ben Roethlisberger. So assuming they land one, that could be good for Juju. I'm not sure. But we know Ben has 1, maybe 2 years left. And then that's going to come down to Smith-Schuster. Also, there's been enough reports. I think it's the wrong decision, but there have been enough reports from different places that have led to the reason that the team is not going to actually re-sign him whenever his contract comes up next year. And that could very well be true because I've seen it from so many different people within that organization now. But if that's the case, then you have to also factor in his next landing spot. So Dynasty, it's kind of all over the place. It's like you said, the context goes in so many different directions, and you have to bet accordingly depending on what you think will happen.
So I'm going to relate my answer to this question to a guy who people were having similar concerns about not too long ago, and Michael Thomas. So I do think the situations are a little bit different, but I think they have enough similarities for us to talk about both at the same time. So a lot of people were concerned with Michael Thomas because of the imminent retirement of Drew Brees. Now we think Drew Brees is in his last year. I think he's already signed on to have some sort of TV gig after he's done playing football.
At my company, I did not sign the same deal. I'm still making fantasy football money, so don't worry.
Absolutely. So we think that he's not going to be back. But Jameis, obviously, if he stays around, then that's no problem for any of the receivers on that team. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be him. It can be Teddy Bridgewater. It can be anybody. We've seen him succeed in any type of situation with any quarterback. I think Juju might be the same way. I just think that The difference between Teddy Bridgewater and Devlin Hodges, it's night and day to me. I think Teddy Bridgewater is at least still, even if he's a low-end QB1, he can still be a starter, still be an effective starter for your team. I don't think that's the same thing with Juju Smith-Schuster. So I think wherever he goes, he's still going to command alpha targets. And as long as he can command that volume, playing in the slot, he's generally going to get matched up against lesser corners. So as long as he's able to maintain that volume, I don't see any problem for Juju moving forward, even if he were to leave the team. But even in the instance that he doesn't leave the team, let's say that the Steelers keep taking shots at these quarterbacks and keep taking shots at these quarterbacks. If you look at the next couple of drafts, there's some decent quarterbacks to actually be looked at. The question is whether or not the Pittsburgh Steelers will have the draft capital necessary to go ahead and get one of these guys because of whatever success they might have with Ben Roethlisberger that maybe might get them to a playoff spot or maybe a little bit beyond that, but not quite good enough to win at all and kind of leave themselves in a situation where they're too good to really be in the running for those top-end assets at quarterback and not really good enough to really truly compete. So that's the one thing that maybe concerns me about Juju staying in Pittsburgh, but I don't think it has to be Pittsburgh for Juju to be successful.
At this point, I think you're right. I think him staying is worst case scenario. That doesn't make it bad. I know that term has negative connotation, but I think that's worst case scenario because you're betting on a rookie quarterback at some point in the next 3 years, most likely. But I'm willing to bet on him still, even if he doesn't move, as a DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore type of player, and that he is far too good and can buck any quarterback's poor play. Think how many times those two receivers I just mentioned have heightened Tom Savage, Brandon Whedon, which is too many times. I've already mentioned him on this podcast. Kyle Allen, Will Grier last year. I think Juju can do the same in a full healthy year with poor quarterback play. Clearly didn't happen last year, but also had 3 different injuries throughout the year last year, I believe, which makes it like that much more reason to forego that season altogether and just bank on whatever you thought in 2018.
All right, so as fantasy analysts do every year, people are obviously going crazy about these rookies and starting to peg them in certain roles and expect that they're immediately going to take volume away from incumbents, so on and so forth. James Conner is an interesting case because Anthony McFarland is his new backup, I guess, kind of added to the mix with the guys that they already added last year. Does this just show that this team is not committed to James Conner long-term because they keep adding to this backfield? Or is this team, after the Le'Veon Bell situation, just coming to realize that, hey, we can do what San Francisco did. We can try not to pay the Jerick McKinnon money, try to learn from that mistake and look at the other guys on that roster and try to find guys that are going to come in at cheaper costs, play them throughout the rookie contracts or play them on cheap deals, and then chop and change and replace as it comes. Is James Conner's workload on the chopping block, or is this a situation where they just weren't happy with the balance they had after Conner in the event that Conner goes down again?
They have done nothing this offseason except leave little tea leaves here and there that they have no interest in giving him a featured role beyond a committee approach. Benny Snell added last year. Home run hitter Anthony McFarland added this year in the 4th round. And they already, in their post-draft conference, squashed the idea when asked about re-signing him as he approaches the final year of his deal this year. So I think it's very clear that they are done with James Conner moving forward. This year, I still expect him to have somewhat of a role. Like he seems to be pegged as the early down grinder for them, whereas Benny Snell slides in. Even though Benny Snell, don't even get me started. He's just going to take over on goal line role. Who knows what he'll do with it. And then Anthony McFarland is the guy, even in redraft leagues, I'm actually pretty interested in this year, with Jalen Samuels as the pass catching specialist. So the issue is all 4 of those guys have 4 completely different skill sets, which means they'll likely all 4 be used, which of course then leads us to believe James Conner won't be featured whatsoever. And I understand he played, I believe it was over 70% of the snaps anytime he stayed in the game fully healthy last year. But he also had 5 different injuries and left the game 5 separate times despite being cleared for those games. So he's also proven that he can't stay healthy.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear to say that is a precarious position to put yourself in if you're relying heavily on James Conner this year. But moving forward, from a dynasty perspective, oftentimes you see running backs still have the ability to be effective immediately on their new teams. I was reading some of Scott Barrett's work on PFF long ago. He did some work called Metrics That Matter, and he looked at wide receivers versus running backs and what their effect on brand new teams were. And he found that wide receivers generally take about a year to a year and a half to be their effective selves again, whereas running backs, if they find themselves in a halfway decent situation, it's kind of like a stop-start thing with them. I think that's maybe something that might be kind of helping Todd Gurley this year. If you weren't necessarily somebody that really had much faith in him landing in Atlanta, I don't think is any worse than being in Los Angeles. So I think that's going to be a decent spot for him. And I think he's going to still be a decent running back. But I think the only reason that a guy like him even got a job of that quality was because of what he was beforehand. He was the league #1 back for a number of years. James Conner has never really hit that role. It seems to me that when these somewhat second-tier running backs find themselves in the open market, they just find no suitors available to them. So I'd be very, very worried beyond this year what happens with James Conner, because I don't necessarily see him finding himself on a new team that's willing to give him a full bell cow role, especially with some of the guys that are even coming in next year, like Etienne, like Chuba Hubbard, and so on and so forth.
Oh, yeah. Finding a home in general, no issues whatsoever. But finding a home as a bell cow, absolutely just not happening, especially because we've seen the past 2 years alone, bell cows are slowly a dying breed, and we're having to analyze more committee approaches and what players to take in those committees. So I would expect him to land that kind of role moving forward.
So let's talk about Eric Ebron and Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool, who worked out at wide receiver, with all intents and purposes, still is a wide receiver for this point, even though everybody thinks that he's going to be used more as a move tight end slot sort of seam weapon. Eric Ebron excels at that. That's what he does. He does that, and he catches touchdowns. He falls down occasionally. Are we going to see these guys kind of split snaps? What are the Steelers trying to do at this move F sort of position for them?
So Claypool, who caught 16 passes, 20-plus yards downfield in his senior year with Notre Dame, was initially thought to be pigeonholed in the league as a massive 6'4", 238-pound tight end. But Steelers OC Randy Fishner already confirmed that Claypool actually will be playing out wide. So it kind of creates a little bit of a conundrum. Having said that, it doesn't mess with Eric Ebron's role. What now the player we probably need to be concerned about is Vance McDonald. Having said that, we've seen the Steelers run enough two tight end sets, and we've seen Eric Ebron being enough of a red zone role that just the position he plays, you're still probably betting on Ebron because, one, he's valuable right now. He's going in like the tight end 18 to 24 range, and we saw he has double-digit touchdown upside just 1 year removed from doing that with the Colts. And at that position, we talked about this earlier, that's all that matters for tight ends. Like tight end is so hard from tight end 8 and on. So you just give up and you just take the better player with more red zone opportunity in that offense. And Eric Ebron could easily become a tight end 1, like a top 12 guy, just because of using his big body frame inside the red zone. Claypool, though, I think affects James Washington long-term because he does have the ability to play outside. But if he's playing outside, that leaves him either taking away from Washington or Deontay Johnson. And I think we saw enough from Deontay Johnson last year where they wouldn't dare take him off the field in 3 wide receiver sets. Rather, just sprinkle in James Washington as like a John Ross sub-package type, 40% of the snaps, a few gadget and downfield plays since he's the explosive air yards guy for that team, and work with those 4 wide receivers because Juju's safe in the slot. And Claypool, in his last year at Notre Dame, played a career low 106 snaps from the slot. So he's just not going there.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. Again, that's what draftniks were kind of saying at draft time, but it looks like the coach, for once, gave us some clarity on the situation. So I'm very greatly appreciative of that. Let's talk about one other team. And in so doing, we mentioned the fervor that was around Juju Smith-Schuster because of how good he was so quickly into his short NFL career. A.J. Brown has kind of done the same. Is this going to be a situation where we can expect A.J. to repeat? And I think the larger question is, even if we take this away from A.J., can that team repeat what that team was able to do efficiency-wise in the passing game to still keep A.J. In the same realm that we assume he's going to be? I think it's going to be easy for him to improve the amount of targets that he got last year. I expect him to get 120-plus targets this season as opposed to what he got last season, just because it took him until about week 10 to get the full complement of snaps as a Tennessee Titan at the wide receiver position full-time. Do we think that Ryan Tannehill is going to be able to be efficient enough to capitalize on that in the same way that he was last year?
Yeah, it's tough because I think that's the wrong question, honestly. We know he has a ceiling, right? Like we saw what he did last year. When Ryan Tannehill took over under center, he took 6 targets per game, which is nothing. For reference, like Michael Thomas averaged 11 and a half per game. Julio averaged roughly 10 per game. So 6 targets per game, that's like middle of the crop. That's absolutely nothing for a stud wide receiver. And yet on those 6 targets, because of his explosiveness and talent, he averaged 12 and a half fantasy points on with Ryan Tannehill under center. So it's not really about his ceiling. It's about his floor, which we saw as he totaled 5 catches for 64 yards in 3 postseason games, because that's the offense and that's the world he lives in. So for best ball, it's interesting in particular because he has the ceiling and we like spike tweaks in best ball. And he's still a talent. Just to lead the league in yards per route run as a rookie is insanity, because that's also one of the most successful forward-thinking metrics for fantasy success. It's what we can predicate our stats on. And he did that in his rookie year despite the limited opportunity, despite not becoming a starter until week 7. So it's strange. I would think a full season of starts under his belt is what we can expect. And while I am somewhat concerned about the floor, we also know the Titans likely won't be sustaining, like you said, their offensive success as a whole. I would like to think they can, because they brought back Arthur Smith as their OC again. They have Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry back for at least one more year. So they did put the band back together. Ryan Tannehill led the league in passing yards from play action, right? And passer rating from play action passing. So they'll likely look to lean on that approach on offense again, but far too efficient. His 7.7% touchdown rate was second in the league, only behind Lamar Jackson's 9% touchdown rate. And of the 56 guys, only 56 since the NFL merger to have a touchdown rate over 7%, only one has gotten better the next year. So we know regression is going to happen. The thing is, much like Patrick Mahomes' quote-unquote regression, how drastic will that be? And so for Ryan Tannehill, I think he can still produce in fantasy given the legs. Like we saw the rushing floor. And that always helps the quarterback buoy himself into the top 12 usually. For A.J. Brown, it's concerning because the targets. But then again, if they're not as efficient as an offense, does that mean they're in more competitive games? Does that mean they're playing from behind more? Because that could increase his targets. And for Derrick Henry, it's actually pretty concerning, especially when you factor in that they lost Jack Conklin. So I'm still buying A.J. Brown. In Dynasty in particular, you have to like him, right? Of course, no matter what, you're staying the course. In best ball, it's a little bit tougher. You like the spike ceilings, but I don't like him as a wide receiver 1, given his disastrous floor and that run-heavy offense. And then Tannehill, it's interesting because we do expect him to regress, but I would still pin him QB 17 to 20. So like a middling QB2, if only because we saw the ceiling he offers when he runs the ball.
Yeah, Ryan Tannehill just had a crazily efficient season.
Crazy.
A lot of that wasn't predicated on volume, and you hit it with saying, well, if the efficiency goes down in this type of offense, there isn't volume there to then offset it. So it is a little bit troubling when you think about it that way, and I think it's maybe a reason to have some concern. So yeah, I can see why you would be wary in best ball, and again, well, you kind of have to in Dynasty, because if you don't get on the train now, it's gone. It's never coming back, and you're not going to get another opportunity to. So you have to take that when it comes. But what I've been actually looking at a lot of rosters, rebuilding rosters specifically, with the type of price that you can get for AJ Brown right now, I'm advocating for, if you're in a situation where you're not a piece away, where you need multiple pieces to compete, where you're probably still a couple of years out, I'm telling people if you have AJ, try to shop him right now just to get a ridiculous price for him. Maybe get a Tyler Boyd in a first-round pick, something like that back. Do you think that's something that you would do, or would you kind of just stay with what you have right now and write it out and just hope that you can hit on the picks that you're going to have moving forward?
I don't think I would be shopping him so much. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I wouldn't be buying him right now. I think you're right. I love AJ Brown. Absolutely love him. But really the question we're asking is he maxed out? I'm trying to think what I would do in my own Dynasty League. That's why I only like to give advice I would actually have skin in the game.
I love it.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd sell him. Like, it'd literally have to be an offer to sweep me off my feet. And that's only because factor in, this year's so strange, because factor in these stud rookie wide receivers that we love so much, no matter how talented they are. Like, really, they could possibly not run a route or receive even a practice pass from their own quarterback
before preseason.
Until August, until September, which potentially tanks 1 year of their contract, like an entire year. So Dynasty in general has been super interesting this year. If I have to put my foot down, it'd have to be an offer to sweep me on my feet. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I would only sell them if it swept me off my feet.
Okay. That is definitely fair. All right, so let's talk about this last point, and then we can get on to looking at the roster. Now, the Tennessee Titans offense as a whole seems to kind of be maxed out at 3 players being fantasy relevant. Ryan Tannehill, if he continues his rushing, Derrick Henry, if he continues just being a monster, and then A.J. Brown, if he continues the level of efficiency that we've seen so far. But some people are high on Johnny Smith. Some people have some outside hope for Corey Davis. There is a number of people out there that still have some hope in other parts of this Tennessee offense. My opinion of the situation is that there just is not enough meat on the bone. The pie is not big enough for even those 3 potentially to be as fantasy relevant this season as they were last season. Adding more to the pot in something like a Jonnu Smith seems like, maybe you'll get return 2, 3, maybe you'll get lucky 4 weeks out of the season, but that'll be about it for you. Do you think that there's a little bit more sustained success with somebody else in that offense that maybe Dynasty and fantasy as a whole isn't too high
on? It's interesting because I love Jonnu Smith. I think he's a superb athlete. I would like to see him more. But the fact is, Anthony Ferkser ran 44 routes to Jonnu Smith's 42 in 3 playoff games last year. They run both of these guys in dual tight end sets, and it's kind of just luck boxing who gets the touchdown. Like Jonnu Smith, remember, he had an explosive rushing touchdown. It was 60 plus, I believe. And that's how he scored one of his touchdowns on the year whenever Jelani Walker got injured. So it's random more than something we can predict at all. So I can't say I really like Jonnu Smith or anyone else in this offense, honestly, especially since we know Corey Davis will be moving on at the end of the year. However, someone I do think is interesting, because we've talked about the possible efficiency of the Titans offense and sustaining that uber efficiency. So if you can't sustain that, right, then you should be betting against that. And if you're betting against that, you should have Darrington Evans everywhere, because that means if they aren't as efficient, they're playing from behind. And we know Derrick Henry gets game scripted off the field. Plus, Derrick Henry hasn't signed a long-term deal yet, and we don't know if he will, quite honestly. So I do actually kind of like Darrington Evans quite a bit.
Now, do you have any fear that maybe this will kind of just play out how it did last year with them utilizing both backs and then just realizing that, hey, this isn't working, we're just going to have to force feed it to Henry?
Maybe, but do we really think that will go a long way this year? Like it was super fun last year to watch them in the playoff run. But the fact that they just won't use Derrick Henry on passing downs in general, I don't think you can get by a full 16 games by feeding it to him 28 times. It's just not going to work. It was great in the postseason, but a full regular season, I'm not too sure. So I don't believe that. And plus, there's upside with Darrington Evans because, like, even if he's not used this year, again, we don't know if they're going to re-sign him, and that would leave Evans there in 2021.
Is there another back out there with some passing game questions that maybe has you a little bit more worried than some analysts out there? A guy that comes to mind for me is Josh Jacobs with maybe his lack of target upside. I think Nick Chubb with Kareem Hunt in that backfield as well is neutered more than people would like to admit. Is there somebody out there that you think that might be getting a little too much love and people need to be more realistic with?
I'm trying to think. Damian Williams probably just took a big hit, even though his ADP is probably going to go back to the point where I start drafting him more.
I don't think he goes away at all.
Yeah, not in Dynasty maybe, but especially because it's the last year of his contract. So who knows where he would land after this. But in best ball and redraft, he'll have value for sure. So he's someone I like. But Kerryon Johnson, that passing game opportunity, if it ever existed, is gone out the window. You're absolutely correct about Nick Chubb, just eviscerated with a full season of Kareem Hunt now. We already talked about James Conner, and then Josh Jacobs, I guess you already mentioned him, but he's the sneakiest one because people don't realize that not only was it Jalen Richard who was taking it away, but Lynn Bowden's going to take away reps altogether. So, I think you nailed it on the head, honestly.
I love it. All right, let's continue. Let's get into this week's roster. Let's get into this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. So this week's roster is coming from my man, RJ. You can find him at NFL Awesome Sauce. It is a 14-team Superflex League, tiered point per reception, tight end premium league. We're going to go ahead and go into his roster now. So at quarterback, he has Josh Allen. He has – who does he have backing him up? He has Josh Allen at quarterback, I guess. Just with Josh Allen, are you okay with that? I mean, I think we're both in agreement with Josh Allen that we believe that he is going to be within a shout of a top 8 quarterback. I think you drafting him as a top 10 quarterback is pretty much getting him at his floor. And I think he might even be better than that with what Stephon Diggs can do for that passing game. I did some maybe contrarian work on Stephon Diggs that maybe you won't necessarily agree with here. I don't think he's going from a particularly great situation in Minnesota into one that's markedly worse in Buffalo. I think it's kind of more of the same. The thing that I think Stephon Diggs does for Buffalo is it provides them an option in all facets of the passing game. If you look at what they had currently, Cole Beasley not only has been pigeonholed, but he's been the quintessential slot receiver for his entire time in the NFL. That's what you'd expect from a Cole Beasley. He runs those intermediate routes. And then John Brown on the other side of that, he's always had an ADOT of 14 plus every single year in the league. So he's been a deep threat each year in the league. He's never been used differently because I think that's the best way he can be used. If you look at Stephon Diggs' last 2 seasons, he was used vastly different. And the thing that got me a little bit excited about that is the result was the same. The result was still 1,000 yards, was still 6 to 8 TDs in both of those years. But 2 years ago, he was essentially a short yardage wide receiver. He got a lot of his yardage off of yak. He was kind of the intermediate threat for the Minnesota Vikings. If you look at his ADOT, I think it was about 9 or under that for the majority of the year, but he was just fed massive amounts of targets and got a lot of yak. The next year, he received 94 targets, still got 1,000 yards, but this was done on the back of a lot of big plays for Stephon Diggs, a lot of things more down the field than you would expect. So he has the ability to chameleon himself into whatever role is necessary for the offense he's playing in. And that's why I think he's the link for the Buffalo Bills. He provides something that no other receiver on that team does, and that he's able to get open in every area of the field. And I think that's just going to help Josh Allen, even though he has his muted accuracy issues. We're going to throw that out there. That's definitely something to be said. That said, he actually was, I think, 6% above his rookie year in terms of his total completion percentage last year. And I think having a guy that's going to create separation in the way that Stephon Diggs does is going to provide him with easier throwing lanes. Do you think that's going to be the case for Josh Allen? Would you be comfortable having Josh Allen as your sole quarterback in a dynasty league?
Maybe not as sole, but if you're going to have one as your sole quarterback, at least you know you have 2 more years with Josh Allen safe. I know you have 3 more years safely because they're going to pick up his 5th-year option for sure. So you can get away with it. Like I can't help you out if he gets injured, of course, and he runs around sloppily. So there's no telling there. To your point, Diggs is a chameleon. You look back at Matt Harmon's reception perception work he does every offseason, and even this year, Diggs comes away with the highest success rate, 99%, because he beats every single corner and every single coverage. He's just that good. Having said that, Josh Allen's career 27% completion rate, 20-plus yards downfield is a mess. So Diggs can run himself open, sure, but it doesn't matter when your quarterback has one-fourth of a chance of hitting him. The thing about Josh Allen, though, is that at least the organization is putting him in a position to win. I don't know if it's going to lead to him winning, but they're still building the offense around him and letting him do what he does best, running the ball, which helps him provide the fantasy points, while also providing reliable hands underneath in Cole Beasley. Not sexy, but reliable. And then, of course, splash play receivers like Diggs and John Brown. So I do love Josh Allen. I think he's got another good 3 years because they're absolutely going to pick up the 5th-year option. So at least there's that. But like I said, if he gets injured, that's a disaster.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I'm actually looking through the roster now. It looks like he has Jared Goff as well. So
okay.
What do you think
you're
about
good
that
then.
tandem?
Perfect. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like that as well. I think Goff had an up and down season last year, but I think the Rams at the end of the year kind of figured out what they wanted to do, and we talked about that with the increased usage of the 12 personnel, and it turns out that Jared Goff is a little bit better if he has a little bit more time to throw. So I think that's going to be what they try to accomplish this year. So let's move on to running back. We're just going to talk about the top few here. Marlon Mack, Dalvin Cook are his top 2 running backs. Beyond that, we got Malcolm Brown, Matt Breida, the new Miami Dolphin, Royce Freeman, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. God rest his soul. Alexander Madison as well. And it looks like that is going to be it for running back. So Marlon Mack, is he gone completely with the incoming of Jonathan Taylor? Does that erase Marlon Mack from the face of the planet?
I don't personally believe so. At least not for the first month of the season, I would guess. The issue is it also doesn't erase Nyheim Hines, unfortunately, because since Nyheim Hines came into the league in 2018, Mack has seen fewer than 2 targets per game. He caught 65 balls and averaged 7.7 yards per catch at South Florida in college, as they moved him actually all over the formation, including out wide. But we've seen Frank Reich is just not going to do that in the NFL. And so if he's not going to do it with Mack, and he's certainly not going to do that with Jonathan Taylor, who dropped 8 passes on 50 career targets at Wisconsin, his lone weakness was the receiving game, then we know that Nyheim Hines will also stay involved as a pass-catching back, even if that means just a little bit on third downs. So Mack will stay involved, my guess, but it's kind of a disastrous situation because now it's a 3-headed backfield as opposed to a 2.
So, do you have any concerns about Dalvin Cook long-term? I'm of the opinion that the Vikings, with Mike Zimmer leading that organization, with how they want to run the ball, they're going to do the probably not smart thing and go ahead and pay him and have him on the team for the foreseeable future. But I mean, is there a scenario where that doesn't happen and maybe you're worried for a guy like Dalvin Cook because of his injury history?
I mean, there's always a chance since this offseason is such a weird one given the pandemic, but I know they've already begun extension talks. And so I would even say, like, in the next 3 months, I would expect an announcement. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be safe and locked up in Minnesota long term.
Yeah, I think that's just pretty clear to see with the way that team is going to go ahead and position itself to run the football. A lot of people are pegging Justin Jefferson for huge amounts of targets in the absence of a guy like Stephon Diggs. Might I remind people, Stephon Diggs only got 94 targets last year with Adam Thielen sidelined for most of the year. So that team is the total opposite of what we were talking about with the Cowboys a moment ago. That team is moving more and more and more to a run-first offense, I think. Am I a little bit out there with my a little bit of trepidation about heavily investing in a guy like Jefferson, or do you think that there's more than meets the eye initially with him and with the way that this team has conducted themselves so far?
It's just an odd situation because on one hand, they are a run-first offense, and they did record the third fewest pass attempts last year. Having said that, their defense arguably goes from strong to below average. They lost their entire starting nickel package. Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes off to the Bengals. Xavier Rhodes off to the Colts. And Andrew Sendejo, who actually, because they use their safety as a nickel in some packages, he stepped up, played the slot, and they lost him as well to Cleveland, I believe. So just the fact that their defense essentially got worse could mean the Vikings could be forced to put their foot on the gas and throw the ball more. So that's an interesting situation for this year. Also, absolutely no one's going to beat out Justin Jefferson for reps in 2 wide sets and 12 personnel. Olabisi Johnson can't do it. Chad Beebe certainly can't do it. So you're not worried about that at all. You just have to ask yourself, what is this offense going to be? So if we think they're going to be a winning team, then yes, the target share is going to be absolutely concerning behind Adam Thielen. Having said that, I really think they're one that fall out of the playoff bracket, which means they probably will have to throw more. And even getting to like 15, 16, the middle of the league and pass attempts would be an increase in targets. So I still like Justin Jefferson this year.
The real concern is if you can survive as an offensive coordinator as a Minnesota Viking, if you decide to pass the ball that much, because Mike Zimmer is not okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at the wide receiver group on this team, which is easily, I think, the strongest position group on the squad. Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton lead it. DJ Moore after that, probably shouldn't be after those guys. He's probably in the top 2 of those. And then some decent depth in Kenny Stills, Quincy Enunwa, Josh Reynolds, Hakeem Butler, Traquan Smith, so on and so forth. Some of these guys have seen their roles decrease or essentially been replaced with what we've seen in the draft, but he also has guys like Anthony Miller who haven't had any significant adds to his current team. So there is some potential upside there. Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton, with everything that you see at running back with Marlon Mack and Dalvin Cook leading his running back group, is this a situation where you're taking a strength and maybe starting to try to diversify that a little bit by trading one of these stars? And if that were to be the case, who of Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton, and DJ Moore might you consider moving to go ahead and add to that backfield?
If I had to, I would move Amari Cooper. If I had to. I don't think I am, though. Maybe I'm shopping around just to see if someone will overvalue him. Probably not at this point, though, given CeeDee Lamb's addition, but that's why I'm shopping him, because Amari Cooper also doesn't have any more guaranteed money left after this season. So he will become expendable in 2 years. And honestly, like, maybe they do just part ways, because that's when Michael Gallup's contract is on the board as well. And he would clearly cost less than Amari Cooper's current deal. So, it's a situation where I wouldn't mind getting away from Amari Cooper, because perhaps his value is maxed out now.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. I mean, there is something to be said about kind of being in a crowded offense and one that essentially has your replacement already on the team, ready made, and a guy like CeeDee Lamb that can work inside and outside in the same way that Amari Cooper has been most effective so far throughout his NFL career. But I do think that this is kind of like the same thing with the Ezekiel Elliott situation. If you're competing in these next 2 years, I think Amari Cooper has every ability to be a top 5 wide receiver.
You're right.
For the next couple of seasons, even with the other guys in the offense, just because that team is going to be so pass heavy. That team is going to be in the red zone so often that he's just going to see looks after looks after looks in really, really high value situations.
And even in a super flex, like we know last year, Jared Goff was completely schedule dependent. Performed great against bottom 16 defenses, did great against opposite way. Top 16 defenses did great against bottom 16 defenses. So it's a situation where it's a super flex. Perhaps even Cooper holds more value given the matchup over Jared Goff in some cases. So yeah, it just depends what you want to do. I think there will be enough weeks where you will definitely be using Cooper. You may even be benching Sutton. Honestly, it just depends what Drew Lock does with so many mouths to feed. So yeah, I wouldn't mind holding on to him. But again, if you're looking to shop him, then sure. It depends what you're trying to build towards.
Let's go a little bit deeper with Cortland Sutton. Obviously, KJ Hamler, Alberto Begbunam, Noah Fant, as well as Jerry Jeudy are in that offense, along with Cortland Sutton now. Drew Lock, the jury's still out on him. I'm a Denver Bronco fan, as is my co-host. So we're really excited about this draft because not only did we secure those players, we got a center in the 3rd round. We also got, I think, is one of the steals of the draft, and that's on Mootsie in the 6th round at guard. If he can stay healthy, I think he can be one of the best guards in this draft class. And I think that really helps our offensive line as a whole. So there's some improvement there. So to every aspect of this Denver Broncos offense, you've seen additions. Even when it comes to the running back room, Melvin Gordon came in to split work with Phillip Lindsay. There's weapons all over the field. If you're looking for a better situation in terms of talent around a particular quarterback in the league, I think it's really, really hard to put Drew Lock outside the top 5 in terms of the talent around him. The question is whether or not Drew Lock is good, whether or not Drew Lock can be a decent quarterback, and that's the big thing that we've seen. Now, there is some things in his favor. I was looking at, I think, average net yards per attempt, and I compared Drew Lock's to Gardner Minshew, to Kyler Murray's, to Sam Darnold's, to Baker Mayfield's, to the top quarterbacks to come out in the last couple of seasons, and we found he actually ranks 2nd on that list. That's a 5-game sample size, though, so there plays the sample size trap, so make of that what you will, but we have seen some flashes. What is your impression of what Drew's able to do with all these pieces, and does their value as a whole all take a hit just because of the presence of so many other guys in an offense that also heavily invested in the running side of things this offseason?
Is Drew Lock good? That's the $1 million question. We got 5 games from him last year, and the Broncos faced the 2nd easiest schedule in the league of opponents in that 5-game stretch, the 4th easiest passing defense schedule in that stretch. And Drew Lock averaged 6.5 yards per attempt. Cortland Sutton finished with 1 game in that 5-game stretch inside the top 35 wide receivers. And Noah Fant's target share dipped to 9% in those 5 games. Now you add in all these mounts against what we can project as a tougher schedule long-term, and it's just super tough. I list all of that, which makes me skeptical. But again, what is 5 games in the sense of the NFL? Like, I know as much as anyone else who believes in him. So it could literally go either way. And it's the question we're all trying to decide, because this team could very well be a deep playoff contender if Drew Lock is even subpar. But he could also like bring them down to the depths of the AFC. So it's going to be interesting. And I really don't know what to tell you. I think given that he still has value in any format, Dynasty, best ball leagues, whatever the case, he's not even a QB2 in baseball leagues right now, honestly. He's still going in like 25, 26. So if you believe, you just wait, you have skin in the game, and you bet on him late, and you can easily stack these guys. Don't even know if you need to add Noah Fant to the mix. You can get Melvin Gordon because we know he's going to take all the passing down reps over Phillip Lindsay because that's what he does best, 224 career catches. And then you can add Cortland Sutton in hopes that the offseason doesn't allow Drew Lock to get familiar with all these other explosive talents, and thus he still leans on Cortland Sutton more. So if you believe that, you can definitely stack them all for cheap in every format. I am skeptical, though.
So are you taking Jerry Jeudy later now than maybe you had been previously?
Not too much later, honestly, because I still think he's such a super talented player. But I was already taking him. I want to actually hear your top three, but I was already going CeeDee Lamb because I had mocked CeeDee Lamb to the Niners. So I just thought it was the best overall landing spot anyhow. The Cowboys may even be a better spot, to be honest, because they have more need for that position, and he's going to be on the field every single down now, most likely. But I had CeeDee Lamb and then Jeudy and then Ruggs. So I was kind of just taking them like that anyhow.
Yeah, I had CeeDee Lamb 1, I had Jerry Jeudy 2, and then my third was Justin Jefferson.
Fair.
Now I'd probably put Jalen Reagor in that because I think he has the easiest pathway to targets because I don't think Alshon's going to be there when the season starts, honestly. I don't know if they're even going to keep him. And then outside of that, even if that's not the case, then who's he really competing against? J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Greg Ward, potentially. He's really just competing against the two tight ends in Dallas Goedert and in Zach Ertz for targets. So I think that he has the easiest pathway to targets right now. So I put him in the third spot. But yeah, I think you still kind of have to have the faith with him. I just think that it's going to be a rocky first season. It might be a rocky first couple of seasons. One thing I will say for the Drew Lock debate, though, is that, yes, it's a 5-game sample size, but we should also contextualize what that 5-game sample size was. Why was it 5 games in the first place? Because he had an injury. Because he was injured, I think, in training camp, and then he was injured all throughout the first about 1.5 to almost 2/3 of the season. And then he finally got in and started playing games. So those were his first 5 games without really a full offseason program of him working as the one because Joe Flacco still was at that time. So there's a lot to be said about him even just being able to come in and be a decent quarterback at all. So whether or not that there's improvement to come from that, I can't for sure say there is, but there is context to maybe some of the not so nice numbers that you can find when it comes to Drew Lock, looking at that as well, just because of the situation that he found himself thrown into. But yes, you should also definitely cite that he faced some of the easiest offenses he possibly could have and wasn't necessarily an all-star against that. So you should definitely keep that in mind as well.
I want him to be good. I have many friends in Denver. I lived there for a couple years. Love the place still. I go back annually for hikes and to see friends. Sushi Den is an amazing spot for dinner, by the way. Love Denver overall. So I want him to be good. But like really, we just don't know right now. We have literally no idea.
Me too, brother. What about Gardner Minshew? Is he good? Like, I feel like we can have the same conversation about him, maybe even in a lesser extent, because he doesn't have the same amount of weapons as a guy like Drew Lock does, although he was just given Laviska Shenault. He still has Leonard Fournette, obviously, and DJ Chark showed out last year. But they have some question marks outside of that because a lot of their guys are only on one-year deals as it goes forward. Dede Westbrook is kind of first on that list. Do we think that Gardner should be one of those quarterbacks that his team is so willing to kind of go into the season with no real true backup sign to really threaten him for first down reps for number one work?
I love Gardner Minshew in redrafting best ball. However, long term and for Dynasty, I don't know. I just don't think he can win this season, honestly. Because even if he wins, does that mean they really keep him around? I'm not sure winning football is genuinely in this organization's long-term outlook. I don't think they want that. I think they just want to get to London and rebuild, honestly. So there's something to that. And of course, if they're bad, and that would mean Gardner Minshew's bad, they just draft Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields and call it a day. And who knows, maybe even try to trade up anyways if they do just enough, like 4 or 5 wins. And Gardner Minshew is still good, but the defense is so poor. And they just want to rebuild with another quarterback to get their franchise away. But Gardner Minshew was the QB 10 overall in fantasy last year because he carried the ball 5 times per game. He had that rushing floor in his first 8 starts before they they went back to Nick Foles, and then Gardner Minshew has to come off the bench cold, and he just doesn't look the same until that Week 17 game where he put a cap on the season against the poor Colts defense. So yeah, like I'm very high on Gardner Minshew, and I'm kind of high in general on quarterbacks coming out. Just out of air raid, West Coast systems. That's why I kind of liked Anthony Gordon too, and thought he should have got a better rep than just landing as an undrafted free agent in Seattle. It's just that system that I think makes quarterbacks more intelligent, and Gardner Minshew proved that, and I'm curious to see if Anthony Gordon proves that.
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that as well. We've just seen so much success from quarterbacks coming from these spread systems into the NFL, because the NFL is adopting more of these spread offenses. We're seeing more. We're seeing less reliance on X number one receivers. We're seeing more reliance on full complements of guys that are involved in the passing game, going to the tight ends, going to the running backs, along with number two, number three receivers, starting to really close the gap between the target workload of the number one and the target workload of those guys as well. So these quarterbacks that are used to having five guys on the field to go ahead and pass to every down, I think are kind of almost at an advantage now when it comes to the league, because we're seeing the league start to try and move it in that sort of direction. Just a philosophical question really quickly before we get into the tight ends. Do you think this is a whole pendulum swing that you see with what the league is doing, moving to spread offenses? Do you think it goes spread, and then it gets to a point that people realize that, okay, well, no, 12 is the way to go because everybody else is using spread, and if we do that, now we're different? It seems like Bill Belichick kind of did that a little bit in the playoff run a couple of seasons ago with his Patriots team, and we saw the success that the Rams had with that. We saw the success that Philadelphia's had with 12 for a little while now. Is it going to totally go back, do you think, or is this just the new age of thinking? Is this just what we see from now on?
I don't think everyone's going to try it, but the Patriots are definitely prepped to try it again. The Patriots grabbed, if you recall, Devin Asiasi, a big splash play guy who worked in Chip Kelly's offense at UCLA, 14 receptions, 20-plus yard downfield in his final year in college. And then they came back a couple rounds later and grabbed Dalton Keene, who is a blocking tight end, but he played quarterback in high school. Like, he has wiggle at the top of his routes. He averaged over 8 yards after catch per reception as just a guy who sheds tackles and keeps on going. So I think that's the direction with Jared Stidham, whatever Jared Stidham may be long term. I think the direction is 12 personnel, and then you feed to Sony Michel and get James White involved in the flats. And if that's the direction Patriots are going, we know the Patriots just run away while the rest of the team chases them. So I think the rest of all the other teams are trying to go to spread, but who can actually do it efficiently, right? Like, I don't think I trust many play callers in that position. So yeah, I think they'll try to go to spread, but there are only a couple guys that would actually trust, fantasy-wise in particular, to be successful from it, while the Patriots do go to more 12 personnel this year.
All right, so going back to the team we talked about Tyler Higbee a little bit earlier. He is the starting tight end on this team. I don't know if that's starting because he was the better bet last season, or because talent is kind of in the question here, because his backup is actually Evan Ingram. I'm of the opinion that I kind of find myself going in favor of risk when it comes to looking at injuries, when it comes to, you talked about the Tyreek Hill suspension. I feel like being active in those ambiguous types of situations gives you an edge more often than not, because if you lose, you're not investing what you would have needed to anyway. But the reward potentially is outside the risk for me. It's a lot more beneficial to reach for that ceiling, and I think Evan Ingram is a perfect example of that. I think with all things equal, with Evan Ingram healthy, you're expecting him to be within a shout of being the leading target receiver on that team, even with Slayton, even with Golden Tate. I think that he still has every ability to lead that team in targets if he's healthy for 16 games. We just haven't seen 16 games from Evan Ingram, at least not since his rookie season. Is he a guy that you'd be heavily investing in right now, or are you kind of outside of that a little bit because maybe you two are a little bit just too worried about the injuries that seem to happen with him week in, week out?
I wouldn't be investing in him heavily right now, if only because, and I had this situation in a recent Dynasty League of mine because everyone, and it's a super flex, everyone came off the board going a heavy quarterback and top heavy receiver. And so my partner and I, we just stacked running backs out the gates. And then now it's down to the point where like we could be looking, because we had Barkley at like the 4th overall pick. So we were looking at possibly landing Daniel Jones and Evan Ingram and just going with a giant stack as our future, unfortunately. But the fact is, Evan Ingram, like it is well known, credible sources from that organization that they will definitely be moving on. Like they don't have interest in bringing him back after the final year of his contract this year. So I don't know where else he's going to land. So honestly, I think you just save time and get more of a friendlier deal for him if you go shopping for him next season as opposed to right now, because I don't think his value is the lowest it's going to go right now. And I do think he's an incredible talent you should look to get later in the future. You don't catch for 720 yards and 6 touchdowns in your rookie years as a tight end, the hardest position on the field to play, by the way, and learn as a rookie without being an elite talent. And yes, the injuries are why the organization is low on him, and that's why he struggled the past couple years. But his yards per game have still heightened in every single season, and when he's on the field, he makes a difference. So while I like him, I do think he can be more valuable and probably like 9 months down the road.
Yeah, I mean, people get so excited about tight ends coming to the league and producing very early on in their careers. It's actually really rare for tight ends to do that. Now, we've seen more of that with Mark Andrews, with George Kittle, with Evan Ingram recently. But generally what we've seen is tight ends actually not really begin to truly get to their final form until they're on that second contract, generally on that second team. Martellus Bennett was an example of this. Greg Olsen was another example of this. Guys that took a little while to kind of learn the NFL game before they were started to really show their true colors as pass catchers in the NFL. We've already seen some boom from Ingram, so I definitely get what you're saying about him still being a guy to target kind of regardless of where he might be landing going into next season.
And I have one more point. It just slipped my mind, so never mind. If it comes to me, I'll yell at you.
All right, so that is going to be the end of this roster. So again, just to go over some of the highlights, let me go over some of the big guys on the roster here. Josh Allen and Jared Goff at quarterback, Marlon Mack, Dalvin Cook at running back. I can't even speak.
I'm glad we can both not speak after a long and informative podcast. Yeah.
Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton, and DJ Moore at wideout. And then we got Anthony Miller, we got Isaiah Crowell, Malcolm Brown, Matt Breida, Royce Freeman, so on and so forth, backing these guys up. So this is the Dynasty Diagnostic. You are now in the service center. If you didn't already know, we got to put this roster in car terms. So if this roster were an automobile to you, what is this automobile? What needs to be done to it to get it working the way that we expect it to in this next season?
Oh, man. Okay, so I should preface this by saying I'm the worst car guy in the world, the absolute worst.
Perfect. You are in good company. I am too.
My goal growing up was always to make enough money to pay a mechanic, which we're doing well so far. And that's not even a lofty bar, right? That's actually pretty easy. But let's just say, because it's quite nice, but it definitely needs some fixing up, right? So let's say it's like let's go higher than that. Let's go 2011 Lexus. I think that's respectful because the Lexus gives it name brand because it is pretty sexy, but it's a 2011, so it's still kind of worn out. So you got to clean it up a little bit. So yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and you just have to be very careful because you do have we talked about Tyler Higbee in length earlier. I question it. You like it, which is all fair, but you have to just be observing their offense this year. Even 3 games in, you're going to know Tyler Higbee's long-term outlook most likely. So just be wary. Evan Ingram, we've already told you what you need to know, so assess from there. So be careful with the tight end position as a whole. And then you're very top-heavy at wide receiver, but you have the athletes as your bench that really aren't servable if you're trying to win now. Fortunately, the top 4 wide receivers are absolute studs, but you can't really throw KJ Hamler or Traquan Smith or Hakeem Butler in there. As much as I love them, their athletic profiles, you can't use them right now. So you need to maybe fix that position up a bit. And of course, Josh Allen, Jared Goff. Josh Allen, like I said, I still think is going to be absolutely safe with a rushing floor for the next 3 years. Jared Goff, time will tell. So top heavy, but yeah, you're going to need just a tad bit of work. I do like it though.
I'm in the same boat. I think that this is already Cadillac Escalade. This is already something pretty nice. I mean, all you have to do is put the spinners on the wheels, get the 90s thing happening all over again, and then you got this perfect to where it needs to be. But yeah, the only thing you really have to worry about here is the bench. You have a starting lineup to be feared. I think you have ceiling in Josh Allen, you have floor in Jared Goff for however long that lasts. The same thing I think can be said at tight end with Evan Ingram and Tyler Higbee at tight end. Your wide receivers are the definite strength of this team. You do need a running back, but I don't think you need to go out and spend high on a running back. I think acquiring a guy like Damian Williams, acquiring a guy like Mark Ingram that maybe people are a little bit down on because of the draft would greatly help this team and would put you in position to challenge today while you still have those other pieces on your squad that are young enough to keep this team viable going forward. So there's a lot you can do with this squad to get it into ship shape, but I think that you've got a very, very decent squad here. I just wanted to go ahead and say that is going to be the end of this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. Thank you so much for joining us and for listening. Please make sure to follow your head technicians, myself at 8ton Live. Go ahead and follow Sam at FF Stompy. John can be found at Not J Daigle and on Roto World. And John, I just want to turn this over to you really quickly, man. Go ahead and let us know what to look out for from you moving forward.
Oh, yeah, at Not J Daigle on Twitter, the worst Twitter handle ever, but I'm kind of stuck with it a decade into the game now. So subscribe to the Roto World Football Podcast on iTunes, the FSWA winner for Best Fantasy Football Podcast just last year. Still coming out strong every week with 2 episodes. We are on NBC Sports Monday through Friday. I don't know what channel that is on DirecTV and Dish, but find it on google.com. And look forward every, like I said, Monday through Friday, 11:40 to noon Eastern, we're on. And then personally, best ball tiers coming out. I'll be jumping into our typical online guide content right after that. So I may sprinkle in a few columns and notes here and there. But overall, I try to make my best ball tiers as in-depth as possible so they can be evergreen for the next 2 months. Anytime you look at them on Roto World, they should be able to serve you if you have questions to nitpick between players. And like I said, you have my Twitter handle now. So always feel free to reach out. I am more than available. I'm quarantined and ready to go.
I love it, man. This was a blast. Really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen out there. Thank you, fellow technicians out there, for going ahead and listening to the show. Please go to the Dynasty Diagnostic Podcast feed on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating and review. It helps the podcast grow, reach more listeners, reach more technicians such as yourself. We have a Patreon and a store, nb.com, a store called FF Pod Shirts. It's Dynasty Outhouse's store. 10% goes to Scott Fish's Fantasy Cares. So make sure to check that out as well. And thank you for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on your next visit.